Mama. I'm Courtney Cecil, proud mom of 2 boys and an organizational culture and behavior change executive. And I'm a believer in building a movement to help the burned out, overwhelmed working moms reclaim their control and free time so that they can confidently remain in the workforce without losing the sanity or themselves. Now, let's get started.
Hey, y'all. I'm your host, Courtney Cecil, and welcome back to the Life Management System. And inside this episode, I am so excited to host Paul Sullivan, the founder of the Company of Dads. So, Paul, instead of talking about and introducing who you are, I think the best way that I can do that is actually turning that around to you and saying, what the heck is the Company of Dads and what inspired you to start it?
It's the ultimate life management system. If that's, it dovetails nicely. What inspired me to start it was in 2013, my wife started her own asset management firm. And up until 2013, I was fulfilling every career objective I ever had and more. As a kid growing up, I wanted to write for the New York Times. In 2008, I became a business columnist for the New York Times. I wanted to write a book. My first book came out in 2010, did really well, introduced me to the world of keynote speakers. I wanted to have kids. By 2013, we had 2. And things were cruising along. I grew up very modestly. We're living in a much nicer town, and I couldn't believe how fortunate I had been. And when my wife said, I want to start my own firm, I said, you 100% have to do it. And she said, just one thing. And I said, what? She says, what are we going to do with the kids? And I said, I'll become the lead dad. Now, if you go on the Company of Dads today, that phrase lead dad is everywhere. But what it meant was I was going to be the go-to parent. I was going to be the one managing our lives. I was going to be the one supporting her in her career, still fulfilling my own career objectives. I was going to be the one doing the play dates, the doctor's appointments, the dentist, get a call from camp or school. I was going to be the one to respond. Now, the only catch to all of this is that from 2013 to 2020, I was an undercover lead dad. I didn't feel that in my town, where most of the caregiving was done by moms or paid caregivers, I could be open. And I certainly felt that if I had gone to the New York Times, it would have been a problem. Now, they never gave me any indication, but I was insecure. I thought, I don't want them to think that I'm anything other than 100% committed to my job. So I was doing all of this life management undercover. Of course, 2020, we all know what happened then. COVID happened, and the whole thing blew up. And that was really the genesis of turning something that I had been doing, on the sly, though enjoying, into a business. And so today, the Company of Dads launched in 2022, and we do 3 things: media, community, and workplace education. Media, we give it away for free: newsletter, podcast, a feature called the Lead Dad of the Week, just to show how big and diverse this group is. About 25 million men in the U.S., or a third of all fathers, are lead dads. Community is pretty obvious, and workplace education is working with companies to help them either change their policies or implement the policies they have in a more equitable way, so that men can be lead dads. Working moms don't feel that parenting and caregiving is somehow gendered, and managers can see better ways to manage lead dads, working moms, and caregivers that report up to them.
I love that, Paul. And hopefully now the audience knows why I just hosted my first ever Mel on this podcast. And the thing that you didn't say that I think is really important in your narrative is you have 3 girls.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, when I heard you say that, I'm like, God, he doesn't, it's not just about your experience as a quote unquote lead dad. I love the fact that you disclosed and described it as being undercover at one point in time. And the fact that you're able, we always tell my youngest, he's a lot quieter. We say, you need to use your loud and proud voice. Paul, it's like you're now using your loud and proud voice around your identity and how you spend much of your energy. But most importantly, you're writing the script for the future of your girls. And that's really cool. So when you dream up the future, if you were to write your own script on what the future for working parents look like, what would it look like, and how can others join you in helping make that a reality?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that my 3 daughters have a choice, that they're not assigned things that they have to do just because they're girls who become young women who become perhaps one day moms. If they want to be the lead mom in their relationship, fantastic. But if they marry a lead dad, I don't want it to be something that, I don't want the Company of Dads to exist in that way in 20 years. I want it to be a source for all fathers, for all families to come and fulfill their full potential. I want them to be able to make these choices. I mean, my wife She's always been the higher earner, and she's always, traveled more, had less control over her schedule, but she's still the default. She's still like the school nurse calls her. Drives us crazy. Why does the school nurse call her? The school nurse is a working mom. Why would the school nurse think like, here's the key person? I want my daughters to live in a world where that doesn't happen. When they go to the office, they don't have a manager who assumes that because they're having a child or becoming a mom that somehow they're going to work less. They may work differently. We all work differently when we have kids, but differently and less are two separate things. So you're absolutely right. I want to create the future in which my daughters can thrive at whatever they choose to do in life.
Gosh, I love that. And the thing most especially, Paul, is that when you said, I hope that 20, 25 years from now, this isn't a thing. And that's the same thing with Working Moms Movement. I actually had to think quite a bit and tested quite a bit whether or not this is what I wanted to call this business, because it implies that there is some difference between working men and working women, and most particularly working dads and working moms. But at the same time, there's still a very steep hill for us to climb, because to your point, who's the nurse going to call? The mom. And so regardless of what we aspirationally want, the reality of where we are is very different now. And thank God there are people like us that are kind of fighting to normalize the fact that there is a life that people have outside work, and that life often includes parenting. And for many parents, until we start to balance the equity at home and start to balance the perceived notion of gender dominant roles, this pattern will not change.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. There are two assumptions at play. The assumption is that in the workplace, the mother will take on the caregiving responsibility, and the reverse, assumption is that men will not. That men will show up all the time and work. This is, sort of the model worker created by Milton Friedman, University of Chicago, Nobel Prize winning economist, and that doesn't work anymore. It wasn't working for years up until COVID, and COVID showed that it just fell apart. But companies are slow to adapt. And, one of the things that we really push for, and why we say that, lead dads are natural allies to working moms, is that when they can put their hands up and say, hey, I'm leaving now at 3:00 to do X, Y, and Z, or hey, I'm the one staying home because my child is sick, that begins to change the dynamic. As we say at the company dads, there are only two things that women can do as parents that men cannot do. They can carry a child for 9 months and give birth, and if they so choose, they can breastfeed. Everything else a man or a woman, a mom or a dad can do, but it's become gendered. And so we have to push people and say, like, why do you assume that? Why is that the case? Why can't the dad be the go-to parent? Because the mom has a job where, she's traveling more. We have many cases where the husband is a lead dad. He earns far more than his wife, but his wife is, say, a child psychologist or a neuropsychologist. Those are jobs where you can't just, cancel your patients for the day when your child is sick. And so that higher earner dad, he is the lead dad, and he'll come in and do it because it's rational. And if you think of your family as a team, the way you think of teams inside a company, I think that makes it all gel together and make more sense for people.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge how much I appreciate the fact that you talked about men leaving loudly. I think it's a responsibility of any manager to leave loudly when you have to say, listen, I need to leave because I need to check my kid out because they're sick. I need to go do this because of XYZ, whatever personal emergency. I think that leaving loudly helps normalize the fact that there is a bigger life. We are not robots. We are not, not just robotically delivering for the company. And it helps create empathy in the workplace. And that empathy in turn improves engagement and improves the stay factor, the retention factor that our organizations have. But men leaving loudly for kid related stuff, that's disruptive in the best, healthiest kind of way. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, we call it a form of proactive management. And we have this example, but there's one guy I always talk about, David Newsom. He worked for a financial services firm based mostly on the East Coast. He lived on the West Coast. He wanted to take his son to school every day, so he blocked out 7:30 to 8:30 on his calendar. Now, if he was on the East Coast where everybody else was, nobody would care. On the West Coast, first couple of weeks, people would call him and say, hey, can you take this? He's like, no, I blocked out my calendar. After this is over, you'll have my full attention. I can work before it. I can work after it. I'll work late. And then, okay, so people stopped calling him. Then they started to text him. They started to email him. And he said, nope, I'm not going to respond. I'll respond to you at, 8:30, my time, which is 11:30 your time. And we'll go from there. And what had happened was pretty soon people started to respect his boundaries. And that was good for him. But within a couple months, it became really good for all those men and women who reported into them. Suddenly they wanted to have a meeting with him. They wanted to understand how David was a partner in this firm, so nobody could fire him. He wasn't fireable, so he could do this. And he inadvertently sets this example that he didn't really set out to do. He just wanted to take his son to school. And instead, all of these moms and dads are calling and saying, thank you for doing this. When I saw that you were doing it, I realized that I could do it too. And that's one of the biggest, whenever we see these studies that say men take, less parental leave than women, oftentimes the interpretation, I believe, is incorrect. The interpretation is men don't want to do it. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe the case is that men feel they cannot do it because they have managers modeling the wrong thing, who say things like, man, when I was in your role, I miss so much. Like I was working all the time. And they don't say it with remorse, which is what a normal human being would do. They say it as a sense of like they're bragging that they were.
Yeah.
But that's not great for that individual man, but it's also bad for that organization, because if in the future we want to select our most dynamic and thoughtful leaders, we don't want to pick just the people who happen to be in the office more than anybody else. We want to pick the people who can do the job. And by having both men and women take equal parental leave, that's moving the line forward to start that selection process.
Yeah, and one of the things that I hear my friend Sarah Wells talk about. So Sarah is the founder of, or an author of a book called Go Ask Your Mothers. And Go Ask Your Mothers really is about the manager's role and helping equalize the experience for employees and helping them, while it is specifically about supporting working moms, because that's the lens she knows, the message is still the same, that a lot of that goes back to what's modeled up top. And it is our responsibility as managers and leaders in particularly these big corporations to be empathetic and to be vulnerable. And instead of, to your point, wearing the amount of time we put into the job like it's a badge of honor. We are just perpetuating the hustle culture instead of normalizing that we are humans that have other needs beyond what exists in the four walls of our office.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to be a really poor manager in 2025 to say, a woman tells you she's pregnant, and if you were to say anything other than congratulations, you're a pretty poor manager. Most people have been trained that you don't say something like, are you kidding me? We have a project due in 3. How long is this thing going to take? Like 9 months. It takes 9 months. That's how it works. But that's like hard power. The soft power is the more nuance and like, how do you handle people beyond parental leave? Parental leave is table stakes in a poker game. How do you handle the long game when kids are 5, when they're 8? My girls are 7, 12, and 15. Different parenting challenges, but they're still parenting challenges. It's not like, once you go back to work after a newborn, easy peasy, this is great. Or once your kid goes off to kindergarten, oh, they're in school now, we're fine. And that's where you need more nuance and you need more highly skilled manager to understand that you still get a great amount of productivity from your employees, but you're treating them as human beings, not as robots.
I love that you said that. And I actually want to call to attention a statistic you shared with me, Paul, the first time we spoke. And that is that 83% of heterosexual couples both work outside the home. Now, that surprised me a lot. I thought that there was a higher percentage of stay-at-home moms, but there's something, in order for that to become a sustainable solution and for us, this generation, to disrupt the norms that have happened in the past where women predominantly did stay home, something's going to have to change in order for them to balance it all. Do you believe that the ticket to balance lives at home, and how they do things at home or at the workplace, or both? Or, what would you believe that freedom to balance is?
It's a great question, and you could be the lead dad in America or the most super duper working mom in America.
Super duper.
I think it really comes down to affordable childcare. Like, you both working outside the home. Yeah, yes, the dad can take on the mental load of scheduling the drop off and the pickup. But if you don't have someplace where your child can go for 8 hours a day from 6 months until 5 years when your child goes off to kindergarten, that is really difficult. And I mean, childcare is not just unaffordable in America. There are many places where it is unavailable. And so
Yeah.
if you don't have, and so a lot of great companies, what are they doing? They're partnering with, I have a partnership with Bright Horizons. I disclose that fully. So but a lot of companies have partnered with Bright Horizons to put childcare centers inside their companies. Why do they do that? Well, their workers need childcare, but guess what? If you put the facility inside your office building, chances are people are going to come to work because they're not going to go drop their kid off and then go home. But that is the fundamental. That's the thing that clogs everything up. I'm not saying it gets easier at 5 to 18 or to 22, when your kids are in college, but like if we can solve for that, or somehow, even if it's not affordable, if it's at least more widely available, people can say like, okay,
Mhm.
for 4.5 years, 5 years, I have to pay this, but I can keep working. And all the studies show that if you suck it up, pay it, your career will continue to advance, and you'll advance in a way that your income will grow to make back all of that money you spent on childcare. But if you can't get it, you can't get it, no matter how much it costs.
Yeah, often talk about the economics of working, I try to help new moms understand that if you can figure out how to stay in,
Yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
let's work through that. I think there's some things that are out of your control, like affordable childcare. There's some things that are more in your control, which is how you manage your home life, which is something that I specifically choose to focus on, and helping moms with. But if you can figure out how to stay in, the economics of staying in will give back to you 20-fold in what you give for childcare or what you outsource. I train a lot of moms how to effectively and economically outsource. But the more and more you stay in work, the more and more you can get rid of these items, these tasks that are not your highest and best use. Because I believe working parents' highest and best use is to be a healthy partner to their significant other, to be a present parent, and to be a qualified professional and engaged family member. It's not to do a bunch of the low-hanging fruit around managing household stuff. But to your point, you got to stay in the game in order to enable you to focus on what your highest and best use probably really is as a contributor to society and as a parent.
Yeah, I agree with 100% what you said, but that is, talking about the individual and the individual's agency. If we look at the systemic level, what can companies do? What can managers do to help people stay in the game, as you say? And one of the things we advocate at the company of dads is to allow people to opt into a care shift. This can be for parents, it could be for caregivers. And what it is essentially agreed upon set number of hours each day where you're going to be working, at the same time as everybody else, synchronous,
Mhm.
fancy term for that. So let's say it's 9:30 to 3:30 every day, and you know that if you have meetings, anything you need to do, you're going to be there. Now, nobody's going to work, a 6-hour day. That's not reasonable.
Mhm.
But when companies help people plan their time better, like, okay, you've got presentations to do, you've got, Excel documents to create, you've got a
Mhm.
whole bunch of long range planning and emails that you need to send out. You can still do those in the other 2 to 3 hours of your day when you're not working synchronously. And what that does is it helps working parents and caregivers see a path to the future. And when I tell people this, they're like, what kind of nonsense is this? Did you get this from, some fluffy nonprofit? And I said, no. I said, I got this. One of the people who does this is a guy named David Booth. David Booth's name is on the University of Chicago Business School. You don't get
Mhm.
your on a business school, a big time business school, by attending your reunion religiously. You get your name on a big time business school by donating hundreds of millions of dollars. And he runs an investment firm, and he realized during COVID that he wanted to keep his best workers, and they were in 3 time zones. So he sort of piloted a version of what we call care shifts, and it's worked tremendously because now people say,
Mhm.
okay, I can organize my brain, I can organize my day, and when I am there from 9:30 to 3:30, I am fully thinking about work. I am not distracted
Mhm.
by my children or any other care obligations. And then the other time, like, okay, I need to carve out another 3 hours a day to do all that other stuff I didn't get to do. And people are staying. And that's what we talk about the company of dads, that one way to affect your bottom line is to retain your top workers. Because when they
Mhm.
it costs you a lot of money to replace them, you lose a lot of institutional knowledge, and the person you may hire in their seat may not be the same cultural fit.
Yeah, I love that. And as somebody who specifically focuses on time management, like that speaks to my heart fully, Paul, because I believe that is now the ability to, I'm glad there are people like you pounding the pavement, talking to these organizations, because to your point, that is a systemic problem that really needs to be led from the top down. And what I try to do is help illuminate that possibility for parents that if it is in your control, find those core hours, and then it allows you to swing based on your specific needs, your team specific needs, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Let
go
me
ahead.
add in one more
Yeah.
thing. I don't
Yeah.
want people to think like, okay, that's great if you're a knowledge worker. That's great if you're a white collar worker and you have an office job. What about, other people who have a more of a manufacturing job or in the service economy?
Mhm.
And I tell the story of my cousin who worked for one of the big drywall manufacturers in the country. Now, drywall, that's right behind you. That's that's the wall. You paint it, you tape it. But drywall is super heavy, super messy. You have to have factories all over the country. You can't ship it. It weighs too much. Costs too much to ship it. And this is an old school company that he worked for. He's on the IT side, but it's an old school company. And they thought, okay, coming out of COVID, we need these people to come in and get a good run of drywall going. We need them to be super focused, but they're going to have parenting obligations and care obligations like everybody else. So what this company did was, instead of saying, okay, you're going to work 5 8-hour shifts a week, they gave people the opportunity to work 4 10-hour shifts.
Mm.
The acceptance of that, the desire to do that was through the roof, because now they freed up a day. Okay, yeah, my kid may get sick on a Tuesday. That happens to everyone. But on that Thursday that I have off, that I'm not working that day, I can schedule my kid's dentist appointments. I can schedule
Mm.
my own health care. I can get all this. I can just take my kid to the park and get an ice cream. And it's been huge. So it's not just white collar jobs where people can think of ways to sort of manage time better. You can even think about it in manufacturing. And just by changing around the shifts, have a huge impact on the quality of life of your workers.
I love that you called that out for a lot of different reasons, but that is why I left manufacturing. I started my career there as an industrial and systems engineer, and I left because that was not a sustainable work, environment for a working mom, particularly speaking, 20 plus years ago when life looked very different, society looked very different. It was pre-pandemic, but acknowledging that there's a lot that they can do within their control is powerful. And it doesn't sacrifice. They are not
No,
sacrificing anything other than a little bit of extra logistics. That's it.
yeah.
That's it.
No, and
Yeah.
they shuffle the shifts around anyways, and so people are
Yeah.
covered, and it works just fine.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, speaking, keeping on the theme of corporations and what they can do, you shared when we first spoke that when you were starting the Company of Dads, you interviewed female executives and three primary themes emerged. What were those?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of test out this idea because we had the data that a third of all fathers in the US were lead dads or could be lead dads. But I knew
Mhm.
from my own personal experience as an undercover lead dad that if I had come up to myself and said, "Hey, Paul, you a lead dad?" I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" I'm a New York Times columnist, because men define themselves so too often by what they do more than who they are. So I said, okay, let me do the flip side of this. I'm gonna, talk, and this part was unscientific. I'm always clear. I talked to senior female executives that I'd come to know over 20 plus years as a business journalist. And they fell into 3 buckets. One, this is an awesome idea. That's my husband. He was super helpful in supporting, my career. He did his own thing. He was very fulfilled as well. But I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad you're using the term lead dad, because all of his buddies made fun of him. They called him Mr. Mom. They called him the house husband. He didn't care. He just pressed on. We've got a great relationship. Our kids appreciate it. I'm very thankful. Okay, so that was good. All right, an awareness. Second group was younger women, a lot of success early on in their late 30s, early 40s. And they said, look, I met my husband, loved each other, had so much fun. Obviously, we had a couple kids, things were going great. But if there's one thing this pandemic has shown me, it's that he does not pull his weight at home. And the term, it's not my term, it's Eve Rodsky's term, it's the mental load. And it's like, I am carrying all of the mental load for everything. And I feel like I am giving him assignments, and he'll fulfill the assignment, but I still have to think of what that assignment is. And they would say essentially, like, you need to create a lead dad boot camp, because if my husband doesn't change, this scenario is not sustainable. It's going to lead to bad place. And the third group, unfortunately, were women who had gotten divorced, and they would to T say something along the lines of, I had a lot of success early on. My husband wasn't really supportive. In fact, he couldn't wrap his head around me being the higher earner we got divorced, 5, 7, 10 years ago. I'm glad you're doing this because I hope you can keep, more couples together and engaged and having conversations about these issues.
Thank you for sharing that. So what would you say? Well, first of all, thank goodness the company of dads exists now, to those women's point, to be able to hopefully hedge against some of those broken marriages that might otherwise not have happened had there been just more sense of awareness and balance there. But what would you say, or how would you say, or what, probably the best question is, what would you say to a woman who says, my husband isn't contributing equally, and believes there's some sort of disparity there? How would you recommend that she engage before something goes sideways and they become that third statistic?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say go to the Company of Dads website and download our guide. We have several guides there to help moms and dads. There's a guide called the paper test. It's called the paper test, and it's a super simple test where you take it on a Saturday or a Sunday, not in a moment after you've had an argument. And the premise, a little more complicated than this, but the basic premise is, let's assume it's a husband and wife. The wife writes down everything that she does at home, and then she writes down everything she thinks her husband does, and then he does. He writes down everything that he does and everything he thinks his wife does. And the one thing that we guarantee 100% of the time is that those two lists will never match, ever. And that's the start of the conversation. And where does that come from? It comes from, a good analogy is to think of the couches we have in our living room. If we've had that couch for 5, 6, 7 years, unless it's brand new, if we were to pick it up, there'd be a whole bunch of gross stuff underneath there. There'd be dust, there'd be Skittles, there'd be like Legos, all kinds of stuff. And you pick it up, like, I equate that to the resentment that builds up in a relationship. Unless you lift up that couch, unless you get a new couch, unless you move, you're not going to really know it's there. Because, wives who develop resentment toward their husbands because they believe that they're doing way more in the relationship task-wise than their husbands, it's not like they started doing 20 additional tasks all on one day. They took on one task. Then they took on 3 tasks. Then they took on 5 tasks. Then they took on 10 tasks. And they were so busy doing all these other tasks that they didn't have time to have this conversation that we facilitate with the paper test to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And my premise is most people don't marry sociopaths. You usually work that out in the dating process. You deeply love and you want to get back to that. And most people are eminently reasonable. Like, oh, okay, I didn't even realize I wasn't doing that. Let's see how we can change it. And that's the start of a better conversation. And that's a way to start getting rid of some of that resentment that's been building up in a relationship.
I love this. Paul, I'm going to link the paper test on the show notes for this. I'm also going to be asking all my clients to go through the exercise because it is a very similar conversation that I'm facilitating my clients through, but probably from a little bit of a different way. I love the simplicity of that, and I'm really looking forward to leveraging that with them.
Please
Yeah.
do.
Okay. So last question for you, before I get to the lightning round questions. For anyone who identifies as having a lead dad at home, what does the Company of Dads specifically offer for them, and how would they go about finding you and that information?
So the companyofdads.com is the website. Obviously, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. What we offer more than anything is a combination of information and community. We've created a lead dad library, no different than any of the other libraries for parents out there, except it's written by dads for dads. We offer community. We have monthly online meetups. We have quarterly in-person meetups. And what we really do is we show people that you are not alone. What I get every week, I get emails that say, thank you for doing this. I am now going to call myself a lead dad. I didn't know that this existed. And so what it is, it's a first step on creating a more open and honest, relationship with yourself, but with your spouse, within your community, and at your company.
Perfect. And I would also like to say that in addition to engaging with, through the community with actual quote unquote lead dads, I want to double back on something you said at the beginning, which is that the Company of Dads is an ally to women's ERGs. So anybody out there who is listening, Paul and I both speak to women's or working parents ERGs. And hopefully after this conversation, you can see the power of having a male at the table having that conversation on behalf of all of us, men and women alike. What you're fighting for, Paul, what you're building helps families. It's a great contributor to society, and of which I'm grateful.
Thank you for mentioning that, because we're very committed. I mean, I grew up very lower middle class financially, kid throughout. We're very committed to giving away the media. We have some sponsors, but we give it away. We make all of our money doing corporate education and corporate talks. And so the more we go into ERGs and bring those dads to the table and show that you have this body of parents who really care and want to work differently, the better it is for the company. And that's how we sustain what we're doing at the company, Dads.
I'm a believer in that too. So if anybody has women's ERGs, you know where to find us. Okay, last 3 questions for you. They're lightning round questions. Paul, first, what is your go-to stress busting activity?
If people are watching this, I have a little AstroTurf mat behind me, and I have rubber golf balls, and I'll hit golf balls all around my office, and it's really stress relieving, unless on the rare days when my wife is sick, because our bedroom is right below my office, and she says, stop hitting your golf balls around the office. But I'll do that for 5 or 6 swings and then get right back to work.
That's fantastic. I have a piano sitting here in the side of my office for that very reason too. 5 to 6 minutes is all you need to completely reset. Okay, what's the last book or podcast that you listened to or read and loved?
It's from my other life here. It's as a journalist, it's called All the Worst Humans. And this guy, Phil Elwood, was a sort of communications pro in DC, and he worked for Democrats, he worked for Republicans, he worked for everybody. And it's so wildly entertaining because he's become self-aware of what he did. And it's not your typical beach read, but I absolutely loved it.
I am so curious. I'm a prolific audiobook consumer, so I'm going to make sure that I add that one to the list.
Yeah.
Last question. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you eliminate forever?
What would I eliminate forever? That is a great. I was going to say something that would come across as really mean. I think I know. What would I eliminate? I don't know. I like a lot of things. I don't know what. Oh, you know what I'd eliminate forever? I'd eliminate half days of school right before a holiday break. I would 100%. I would never allow schools to have a half day before you give the kids a week off, because parents are using that time to sort of get all their work done, get everything ready, tie things up, and they're like, oh, what? My kid is coming home at 12:30 and is now going to be home for the next 9 days. So yeah, I'd 100% eliminate half days of school.
Oh, that's genius. That's genius. Okay. Well, guys, hopefully y'all can see why I was so tickled to have Paul here. He is not just fighting for equity on behalf of his daughters, but on behalf of the rest of us as well. So thank you, Paul, for joining me. Looking forward to being able to continue this conversation with you and fighting the good fight. For anybody here, I will drop Paul's the paper test he referred to in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you will see that I've got a free guide on how to productively manage your to-do list and keep it from controlling and overwhelming you. In that free guide, I talk about how to balance task with your husband if you are married and in a heterosexual relationship, because the way that you engage, the way you give away needs to look a little different in order to make that impactful. So if you're interested in that, you can grab that in the show notes as well. But anyway, I am always grateful for a rate and review. But until next time, friends, if nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job. You've got this, mama.